Spiteful Gesture. Written by Mainland Studios, narrated by Gordon and Candlehead Lover. Only a few weeks had passed since Edward had taken his passenger train. It had been Edward's first day out in a long time. And almost all the engines had given Edward their full support. However, two did not. Gordon and 98462 were quite displeased with Edward. 98462 was one of three engines brought by the fat director to the railway on trial. He didn't have a name, just a number. He and Gordon had a great deal in common. They were both rude and cocky. However, unlike Gordon, he never seemed to know when enough was enough. You finally managed to make it out of the station, eh? Cackled 98462 as Edward backed down into the sheds one night. Edward had just returned from his passenger run and was feeling quite proud. What a useless engine you are, Edward. I'm sure we'll be hearing plenty of complaints from the passengers tomorrow. You must have been running late all day, did ya? The others gave 98462 a foul look, but Edward just smiled. Actually, we were right on time. I'm very happy to be useful again, he chuckled. Edward knew that as long as he did not let 98462's words bother him, the engine wouldn't berate him for long. And sort of noon enough, not getting any sort of reaction out of Edward, the big blue bully drifted off to sleep. As Edward was now pulling passenger trains, the fat director extended the timetable to run later into the evenings. This now meant that Edward, Gordon, and 98462 would be running local passenger trains. Edward had his doubts, but was determined to work his hardest. Fortunately for him, he ran the loop line, so only saw Gordon and 98462 at the big station. The weeks passed. Edward felt as if his trains were getting heavier and heavier, or he was getting older and older. The other engines had noticed this, and offered to help. No, thank you, Edward panted. You have your own trains to manage. We can't upset the fat director's timetable. Little did Edward know, 98462 heard everything, and he made a plan. Edward arrived at the big station to collect his passenger train. When he arrived, he saw there were no coaches. Thomas must have broken a blade again, he thought. He was just about to go and collect some more when 98462 came hooting and wheezing into the platform with Edward's coaches. No need to fret, he said snootily. I'll be taking your train today. We mustn't upset the fat director's timetable. He laughed loudly as the guard blew his whistle and set off. Edward was upset, but he thought it was best to get on with his work. That evening, Edward was back into his berth as 98462 was boasting loudly. We don't need Edward anymore. I've proven I can manage two trains at once. Why keep him around when all he does is get in the way? Edward helped build these rails that you run on, fumed Thomas. Without him, none of us could have a railway to work on. 98462 interjected. He's a thing of the past. Us bigger engines are faster, stronger, and more up-to-date than old iron over there. Edward finally gave up. He decided to take a stand against 98462. Little did Edward know that a certain engine heard everything, and that certain engine was Gordon. He began to feel sorry for Edward and wanted to help. The next morning, he woke up earlier than usual to get his coaches and make it to the platform before 98462. The yard was silent, and Edward felt sure he had beaten him. Gotcha! Whoa! Edward jumped. And who should come backing down next to him but 98462. And what do you think you're doing, Edward? Huh? He fussed with gritted teeth. Edward tried to sound brave. Just collecting my coaches for my passenger train, alright? I don't think so, 98462 scowled. You're nothing but slow and old. You are going to sit in the shed and wait to be sent away. Or even better, scrapped! Before Edward could say another word, 98462 backed down on his line and coupled up to his coaches. Edward's heart sank, but not for long. And just what do you think you're doing? Bellowed a familiar voice. It was Gordon, puffing in front of 98462, and the Fat Control Director jumped down from his cab. Collecting my train, sir, so that Edward could have the day off, sir? 98462 replied, trying to look as innocent as he could. From what I've just seen, that is not the case at all. I've had passengers complain that they were saying that they were taken to the wrong stations, and fellow workers complaining about your treatment to others. 98462's face turned white as a ghost. My engines work hard and help one another. You have done neither of those. I want you to stay in the shed until I can trust you again. You heard him, chuckled Edward. Go on now, old man. Back to the sheds you go. 98462 was so embarrassed that he just couldn't muster up a response. So, he salted back to the sheds. The Fat Director turned to Edward. You must understand, Edward, that you are not alone on this railway. If you have any troubles, you must come and see me right away. Understand? Edward could see from his warm smile that the Fat Director was told everything. He looked across the yard and saw Thomas and Henry smiling back. For now, I want you to take your train and have a nice long rest. Thank you, sir, replied Edward. As Edward puffed away, he felt everything on the Fat Director's railway was secured, and had no more troubles with 98462 on that day on. From that day on. That was until another engine. I mustn't say any more, or I shall spoil the next story.